I was standing in my own kitchen, the one I paid off early and renovated myself, chopping garlic and letting the quiet comfort of routine settle in, when Lauren leaned against the counter scrolling her phone and said, almost offhandedly, that she was meeting Ryan for drinks later in the week, like she was telling me she'd be home late because of traffic. The words didn't register at first, not because I didn't hear them, but because of how casually they were delivered, with no pause, no build-up, no awareness that this wasn't a neutral piece of information. She kept talking, explaining it was just a catch-up, that they hadn't seen each other in years, that it was harmless, and before I could even respond she added that it would be awkward if I came along, so it was better if I didn't, and she said that last part with a small, confident smile that told me she'd already decided how I was supposed to feel about it. I remember nodding slowly, stirring the pan a little too hard, feeling that strange disconnect where your body stays calm, but your mind starts lining things up in a way you can't ignore. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive sense people expect, and I wasn't jealous either, because this wasn't about Ryan as a person or some imagined threat. It was about the fact that my fiancée had just announced plans with her ex and framed my discomfort as an inconvenience she'd already solved by excluding me. She didn't ask if I was okay with it. She assumed it, and that assumption landed heavier than the announcement itself. I looked at her and noticed how relaxed she was, how certain she seemed that this was normal, reasonable, something I should simply accept because she had already accepted it for me. I told her I heard what she was saying and kept my voice steady because I needed to understand my own reaction before giving her one. And as I spoke, I realized how clear it was becoming that this moment wasn't testing my trust in her, but her respect for me. Boundaries aren't dramatic lines drawn in anger. They're quiet understandings you expect the person who loves you to recognize without being prompted. And standing there in my kitchen, listening to her talk about drinks with an ex while telling me I wasn't welcome, I felt that understanding crack. She went back to her phone, conversation apparently over in her mind, while I finished cooking and thought about how easily she dismissed the idea that my presence mattered, how comfortable she was deciding what was and wasn't appropriate for our relationship on her own. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse her of anything, but something fundamental shifted for me in that moment, because I saw clearly that if this had truly been harmless, there would have been room for transparency, for inclusion, for respect, and instead there was confidence, not the reassuring kind, but the kind that comes from believing you don't need to explain yourself to the person you're about to marry after that conversation. I tried to focus on my own evening, but Lauren didn't let the moment fade, not directly, just in the way she moved through the apartment like she was preparing for something that mattered more than anything else on the calendar, pulling dresses from the closet, laying them across the bed, holding them up to the mirror, discarding one after another with growing intensity. I watched from the doorway as she finally reached for a dress I'd never seen before, still crisp, tags long gone but clearly untouched, and she said she'd been saving it for something special, saying it lightly, without irony, as if the implication wasn't sitting right there between us. I couldn't remember the last time she'd put that kind of effort into getting ready for dinner with me, the last time she'd asked my opinion or even looked excited about a night out we planned together, and the realization didn't hurt in a sharp way. It sank in slowly, heavy, and undeniable. She caught my expression and laughed it off, telling me I was being quiet because I was so mature about the whole thing, praising me for not being possessive, for not making it weird, and she said it like it was a compliment, like she was proud of me for clearing a bar that existed entirely in her head. What she didn't realize was that in calling me mature, she was admitting she expected less from me, that she thought so little of my boundaries that my silence felt like growth instead of resignation. I nodded again, the same calm mask in place, while something inside me started rewinding through memories I'd brushed off for years, moments that felt insignificant on their own, but now lined up too cleanly to ignore. I thought about the trips she booked without asking me because she assumed I'd be fine with the dates, the plans she changed last minute because something better came up, the conversations where my input was acknowledged and then overridden without hesitation. I remember dinners where she decided where we were going before I sat down, financial choices she framed as already handled, social situations where I was informed rather than included. Standing there watching her adjust the strap of that dress, smiling at her reflection with an excitement I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time, it became clear this wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment, but a pattern I'd been too accommodating to name. She finished getting ready and thanked me again for being understanding, for trusting her, and I realized that what she was really thanking me for was making things easy, for not complicating decisions she'd already made alone. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because for the first time I was listening to what her actions had been telling me all along, and once you hear that clearly, it's impossible to pretend it's just about one night, one dress, or one ex. I didn't sleep that night, Not because I was anxious or angry, but because once the apartment went quiet, my mind finally had the space to stop justifying things. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and one by one the moments I'd ignored started resurfacing with uncomfortable clarity. I remembered coming home from work months earlier to find my condo repainted, the walls a new color I hadn't chosen or even discussed, Lauren standing there excitedly explaining that the old tone felt dull to her, and this one felt more, as if that alone settled it. I remembered forcing a smile, telling myself paint was just paint, even though the place had stopped feeling like mine that day. My thoughts drifted to the wedding planning, how vendors were already contacted, deposits discussed, dates floated, all before I'd been part of a real conversation, my role reduced to reacting politely to decisions already made. I thought about how she skipped my family's holidays without hesitation because they were inconvenient for her schedule, how she never asked me to adjust plans with her family the same way, how my discomfort was always something to be managed rather than considered. Each memory stacked on the next until the pattern was impossible to ignore, not dramatic, not explosive, just consistent and quietly exhausting. The relationship worked because I bent, because I adapted, because I kept telling myself that compromise meant silence, that being easygoing was the same as being valued. Lying there in the dark, I understood that I had been slowly shrinking myself to fit into a version of partnership where my needs were optional and my presence was conditional on not complicating things. There was no surge of anger, no urge to confront her in that moment, just a calm, heavy certainty settling in my chest. I realized I couldn't marry someone who treated shared life like a solo project with occasional input, someone who felt entitled to my flexibility but uninterested in my voice. The clarity wasn't painful the way breakups are portrayed. It was grounding, almost relieving, like finally admitting a truth my body had known long before my mind caught up. By the time the sky began to lighten, the decision was already made, not as an act of rebellion or punishment, but as an acknowledgement of reality. The marriage wasn't going to happen, not because of one night or one decision, but because I finally understood that love shouldn't require me to disappear in order to survive. The next morning felt strangely calm, almost detached, like my mind had already stepped a few paces ahead of my body, watching things unfold from a distance. Lauren moved through the apartment with a lightness I hadn't seen in a while, humming as she got ready, checking her reflection, talking about how busy her day was going to be, completely unaware that something fundamental had already ended for me. While she showered, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, not in a panic, not rushing, just methodically confirming things I suddenly needed to know. I read through tenant laws, making sure that living together didn't magically translate into ownership, and the language was clear, clinical, almost comforting in how little ambiguity there was. The condo was mine, fully and legally, no shared title, no claim through time or intent, no gray areas I'd have to fight through later. I checked the engagement ring paperwork next, learning I could return at a loss, not insignificant, but manageable, a financial hit that felt small compared to the cost of ignoring what I already knew. I made notes, closed tabs, reopened others, thinking not about drama or confrontation but logistics, because clarity makes practical thinking possible. Lauren came out of the bedroom dressed and glowing, kissed my cheek, thanked me again for being so supportive, and I smiled back, not because I was pretending, but because I understood now that this version of her only existed when things were easy for her. After she left, the apartment felt quieter than usual, and I picked up my phone and called Mark, my best friend, framing the question carefully, asking him hypothetically if I might need a place to crash for a bit. There was a pause on the line, not confusion but recognition, and he didn't push for details, didn't joke, didn't minimize it, just said yes immediately and told me I could stay as long as I needed. The ease of that response hit me harder than I expected, because it contrasted so sharply with how complicated I'd made my own needs feel for so long. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a moment longer, looking around a space that was undeniably mine, yet had slowly stopped feeling like home, realizing that preparing quietly wasn't cowardice. It was self-respect finally expressed in action. My phone started lighting up not long after she left, and at first I almost appreciated the updates, mistaking them for reassurance instead of what they really were. She told me they'd found a nice place for drinks, sent a photo of a cocktail with a caption about how they used to come here all the time, then casually mentioned that Ryan looked really good, like time had been kind to him, adding a laughing emoji, as if that softened the impact. I didn't respond, not out of strategy, but because I didn't feel the need to insert myself into something that was already telling its own story. The messages kept coming anyway, each one peeling back another layer of tone deafness, then crossing into something colder, something unmistakable. She talked about how long they'd probably stay, how easy it felt to talk to him, how they still shared the same sense of humor, dropping inside jokes that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with a history I was apparently supposed to be comfortable watching resurface in real time. When she mentioned they decided to get dinner too because they were having such a great time, I felt a strange sense of confirmation rather than surprise, like watching the final piece of a puzzle slide into place. The apartment was quiet, my phone buzzing on the table between messages, and with every update it became clearer that this wasn't thoughtlessness. It was entitlement, the assumption that I would absorb whatever she sent without reacting, because that's what I'd always done. The last message arrived without build-up, almost casually, as if it were just another anecdote worth sharing. And she wrote that Ryan had asked whether she was really engaged, whether it was actually happening or just something she talked about. And she added that she'd laughed it off. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not feeling anger spike, not feeling hurt flare, just a deep, steady clarity settling in. That question hadn't come out of nowhere, and her choice to pass it along said more than any argument ever could. I set the phone face down and didn't reply because there was nothing left to clarify, nothing left to defend, and no need to explain myself to someone who had already confirmed exactly how little my place in her life required consideration. She came home late, keys jangling with that light, careless rhythm that told me she was still riding whatever high the evening had given her. And when she stepped inside, she was smiling before she even saw me, glowing in a way that felt painfully out of place against what the apartment had become. The smile faltered almost immediately as her eyes moved past me and took in the packed bags by the door, the boxes stacked neatly along the wall, and then finally the engagement ring sitting alone on the table where it couldn't be missed. For a second she actually laughed, a short, confused sound, like she was waiting for me to join in and explain the joke, and she asked what all this was supposed to be as if the answer wasn't already laid out in front of her. I told her calmly that the relationship was over, that I'd packed her things, that she wouldn't be staying here anymore, and the steadiness of my voice seemed to throw her off more than the words themselves. She tried to brush it aside at first, saying I was being dramatic, that this was obviously about the drinks and that I needed to relax, but when she realized I wasn't engaging in the back and forth she was used to, panic crept in fast. Her tone shifted, her confidence cracked, and she started asking what I was doing, why I would do this so suddenly, accusing me of blindsiding her while standing in the middle of a decision she'd never once included me in. I told her this wasn't about one night, or one ex, or jealousy, and I watched her expression harden as I said it wasn't just drinks. That was she described, how she talked about it, how she shared it with me. Made it a date whether she wanted to call it that or not. I explained that what mattered more than that night was the pattern underneath it, the way she made choices alone and expected me to adapt, the way my discomfort was always something to be managed rather than respected. She interrupted, minimizing everything, saying I was twisting things, that I was overreacting, that plenty of people stayed friends with their exes, and that I should be proud of how secure she thought I was. When that didn't land, she shifted again, her voice shaking now, saying she felt attacked, saying she couldn't believe I would throw everything away over something so small, painting herself as the one being hurt while ignoring the months and years that had led us here. I didn't raise my voice, didn't list every grievance, because I didn't need to convince her. I just needed to be clear, and I told her I wasn't ending things out of anger, but out of certainty, because I wasn't willing to keep shrinking myself to make room for a relationship where my boundaries only mattered if they were convenient. She stared at me like she was waiting for me to soften, to back down, to reassure her this was just a phase, and when that didn't happen, the silence said everything words couldn't. I didn't raise my voice when I laid it all out, because by that point volume felt unnecessary, and I told her plainly that she had chosen his comfort over our relationship the moment she decided it was easier to exclude me than to respect me. I explained that this wasn't an isolated failure in judgment, but a consistent way of moving through our life together, where decisions were made without me and presented as done deals, where my role was to adjust indefinitely and call it maturity. I told her that loving someone didn't mean endlessly accommodating being sidelined, and that I had reached the point where staying would mean agreeing that my boundaries were optional. She tried to interrupt, tears forming quickly, saying she never meant to hurt me, saying she didn't understand why I was being so cold, as if calm was cruelty and chaos was sincerity. I listened until she ran out of momentum, then informed her that she had formal notice to move out, that the timeline was clear, and that this wasn't a negotiation. The shift in her was immediate and intense, swinging from sobbing apologies to sharp anger, accusing me of abandoning her, of pulling the rug out from under her life, of punishing her instead of talking things through, ignoring the fact that I'd been talking quietly and consistently for years. When anger didn't work, she reached for guilt, reminding me of our history, of plans we'd made, of how much she loved me. And for a brief moment, I saw the version of her that had kept me trying for so long, but it passed as quickly as it arrived. I told her I wasn't doing this to hurt her, but I wasn't going to keep hurting myself to keep things comfortable either. She asked where I was going, why I was the one leaving if this was my home, and I told her I needed space from the chaos, not from my own decision. I picked up the single bag I'd packed earlier, feeling lighter than I had in months, and walked out without another argument, without a dramatic goodbye, because peace doesn't require a performance. As I closed the door behind me, I understood that choosing myself wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was the final boundary, and it was one I intended to keep. The weeks after I left were loud in a way the relationship never had been, my phone filling with missed calls, long voicemails, and messages that swung wildly between remorse and desperation. Lauren apologizing, explaining, promising she finally understood, as if insight gained too late could retroactively change anything. At first I listened, not because I was reconsidering, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't running from something unresolved, and each message only confirmed that I'd made the right choice. One voicemail stood out, her voice quieter than the rest, admitting that even Ryan had commented that the night hadn't been appropriate, that he'd asked her why she'd gone through with it knowing she was engaged, and hearing that didn't sting the way it might have months earlier. It simply closed the door I'd already walked through. I returned the ring, accepted the loss without resentment, and spent a weekend reclaiming my condo, repainting the walls back to something that felt like me, rearranging furniture, opening windows, letting the space breathe again. The quiet that followed wasn't lonely. It was restorative, and for the first time in a long while my home felt like a place I could rest instead of perform. I focused on work, reconnected with friends I've been distant from, cooked for myself without distraction, and noticed how my thoughts stopped bracing for conflict that never came. Months passed, and somewhere in that time I started seeing someone new, casually, easily, without rules to navigate or test to pass. Just conversations that didn't feel like negotiations. There were no power games, no assumptions, no pressure to prove maturity by swallowing discomfort, and that simplicity did more for me than any dramatic declaration ever could. Eventually Lauren reached out again, claiming she'd grown, that she finally saw what she'd done, that she hoped we could talk, and when I read the message I was surprised not by what she said but by what I felt, which was nothing at all. No anger, no longing, no urge to explain myself one last time, just a calm distance that told me the chapter was complete. The story didn't end with satisfaction or revenge or some triumphant moment. It ended quietly, with relief, with the understanding that peace doesn't announce itself. It settles in when you finally stop arguing with your own boundaries.